Tonight he's going to tell us about his latest book on politics and related issues. This couldn't be more timely. The title of the book is The Political Mind, Why You Can't Understand 21st Century American Politics with an 18th Century Mind. This is truly pioneering work that weaves together political science and cognitive science, and it offers many practical insights and lessons for the world that we live in today. Because our campus is new and we are all pioneers, teachers, students, researchers, staff, administration, we felt that Professor George Lakoff was the perfect choice to be our first distinguished cognitive scientist. Please join me in welcoming him here tonight and in honoring him with this award. Thank you, George.
Who this is. But if you haven't heard one of her lectures, you've missed a great experience. Anyway, it is wonderful to be at a place that takes cognitive science very seriously, and I think will develop into one of the world's centers in a few years. I think it's already started in a remarkable way. I want to talk a little bit about the most recent book and about what's going on in the election and about what's on your news today. A lot has been going on in the last couple of days. But let me start with a bit about cognitive science and why it matters. We mostly grew up with a certain view of mind that came from the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment started in the middle of the 1600s, and it was the basis of American democracy. That is, ideas like equality, freedom, fairness, democracy came out of the Enlightenment. Very important, crucial ideas. Along with that came a theory of mind put forth by René Descartes. And the idea there was that people thought rationally, and that as a result, they could have a democracy because they didn't need to ask anybody else to think for them, that we could all think for ourselves. Terrifically important idea. That view of what the mind was, the details of it, came out of 17th century philosophy into 18th century politics. And it's come down today as the most normal view of what reason is. And here's probably all, if not grown up with it, certainly encountered it. It goes like this. It says, reason is conscious. As Descartes said, therefore I am. I'm conscious of reason. That reason is dispassionate. That is, that passion gets in the way of reason. That reason can fit the world as it is. In itself, that it's logical, and therefore, given the fact, you can reason to the right conclusion, that it's universal, that's what defines us as human beings. So all of us, given the fact, can reason to the same right conclusions. And that it is abstract. It's not a physical thing, it's an abstract thing. And it's based on a purpose. The purpose is to pursue our own purposes, our own self-interest. That's the traditional view of reason, and a lot of us are brought up with it. I don't think anybody has gone through life without hearing what. What cognitive science and neuroscience have shown in the past 30 years is that every part of it is false. Every single bit. And it turns out that the way that it's false matters for our politics. So let's go over first a little bit of the cognitive science. Consciousness. It turns out about 98% of reason is unconscious. It's what your brain is doing while you're busy being conscious. Consciousness is the tip of the iceberg. Most of what's going on is below that level. And it is shaping consciousness. That is a shaping conscious reason. Second, is it dispassionate? Well, not really. In fact, the reverse is true. Antonio Damasio, one of our leading neuroscientists, wrote a book about 10 years ago called Descartes' Error, where he went through studies that he had done on people who had brain injuries and strokes. And those brain injuries and strokes got sort of wiped out that part of the brain that allowed you to feel emotion and to recognize emotion in others. So try to imagine if you had had such a stroke or injury, you could not feel any emotion, or you could not tell what emotion anyone else felt. Now you might think that this was a great advantage in rationality, like Mr. Spock in Star Trek or something. It turns out the reverse is true. That you can't be rational without being emotional, and there's a very simple way to see it. Suppose you had such a stroke or brain injury, how would you know what you want? Think about it. How would you know what you would want? I mean, would you, if you got what you want, would you like it or not like it? Well, like or not like doesn't matter. What about other people? Would they like you or hate you? Or you couldn't tell. So you wouldn't know what you want. And it turns out that people who have those brain injuries and strokes mess up their lives. They can't function rationally at all. Now, why is it the case that this is true? Well, the first thing has to do with the idea that reason is supposed to be abstract. It's supposed to be somehow floating in air or something. Turns out that's false too. Oddly enough, you reason with your brain. Now, you might think that certain political leaders reason with certain other parts of the brain, but in fact, they too reason with their brains. And you don't have any choice about this. But a brain is not a general purpose reasoning device. It's not like a digital computer or anything like that. It is made up, it's a biological piece of your equipment. It's made up of neurons, which are connected to other parts of your body. You can evolve to run a body. And neurons have certain properties. There is a field of neural computation that studies how they work. They don't work like logic machines or anything like that. They're very, very different. And one of the things that's important about that has to do with how they're hooked up to emotions. So it turns out, for example, you might wonder why it is that you can't reason without being emotional. And the reason has to do with what is called cultural narratives. Take a typical hero-villain narrative. Okay? You've got a story which you see all the time, every time you see a detective story or one of these things on TV, where there's a villain that does something unspeakable to somebody. And that makes you angry. Then you have a hero who encounters the villain and you don't know who's going to win, and that makes you fearful or anxious. Then the hero wins and you feel happy or satisfied. The reason for that is that you have both semantic content, hero, villain, etc., and emotions that go with it seamlessly. What Damasio and his wife Hannah have found is that there are actual neural pathways linking the emotional regions to the semantic regions seamlessly, so that they form a single whole, a cultural narrative. And we have hundreds of cultural narratives. We have a rags to riches narrative, for example. We have all sorts of these things, and they show up in political biography. So John McCain has a hero narrative. You get a rags to riches narrative, say in Obama, or Joe Biden, or Sarah Palin. There are all sorts of other narratives that you have, and they have both semantic content and tremendous emotional content. In short, you can't understand any political commercial without cultural narratives. You can't understand a political speech, a political biography, without that. So what that means and how is that carried out? It's carried out by neural structures in your brain. Now think for a minute about what that says about the idea that reason can fit the world directly. The answer is it cannot. You have to understand the world through your brain. Everything you understand about the world, everything you perceive, hear, think, anything at all that you understand about the world has to go through your brain. Now that brain is structured, and it's structured in terms not only of cultural narratives, but of things called frames and metaphors that I'll tell you about in a minute. And you can only understand the world in terms of the structures you have. You can't just see the world directly in its own terms. That is a remarkable thing. So the idea that you can just get the facts and reason to the right conclusion isn't true. Moreover, you can reason in terms of narratives which aren't just logical. They have a logic of their own. They don't work by mathematical logic. So it's important to understand that much. But beyond that, there are other kinds of structures that are there physically in your brain that you use for understanding the world. One is called frames. So let me tell you very briefly about what a frame is and why it matters. Back in the 1970s, Erving Goffman, one of our greatest sociologists, wrote a book called Frame Analysis, summing up a lot of his research over the years. And in that book, he pointed out that institutions, he had studied many kinds of institutions, had a single kind of structure, called the frame. Now, this is a man who didn't just sit in his living room studying an institution. If he studied in the insane asylum, he would work in one. He studied Las Vegas, he became a croupier for a year. And he actually did it. And he came to the conclusion that all institutions have the same set of structures. That in these structures, people play roles. And it's sort of like a think of a play, a list of dramatis personae. That is, you have a hospital. And in the hospital, you have doctors, you have nurses, you have patients, you have receptionists, and so on. You have certain places, like operating rooms or reception desks. You have instruments like, syringes or defibrillators or scalpels. Those are the roles that are played. Then there are what happens in the hospital. There's a list of things that you know. You know that surgeons perform operations in their operating rooms using instruments like scalpels. Okay, no problem. Then he points out that these frames have boundaries. You know when you're not in one. So what he called breaking frame occurs, for example, you go to visit somebody in a hospital. You go to the reception desk, there's a doctor lying there, they give you a scalpel, say you're operating on the doctor. Doesn't work. You've broken the frame. And that's not what's supposed to be going on in the hospital. And you know that. And you know hundreds of other things like that. Thousands of things. You know lots and lots about frames because when you learn about the culture, you're learning lots of those structures. Those structures are characterized in your brain by neural circuitry. And the neural circuitry isn't that complicated. It turns out you can learn lots of things easily. In our lab at Berkeley, in the Neural Theory of Language project at the Computer Science Institute, people there have worked out a lot of how that works, what the neurocomputational principles are. And it turns out frames work by principles that are fairly easy to learn. Now, and that would be required in math. In addition to this, there is metaphor, which Dean was talking about, and which we've been studying now for nearly 30 years. And it turns out metaphor is not just in language. This is not a poetic thing. Metaphor is a part of how you think. For example, you understand more is up. So prices rise, fall, lots of different words for a single idea. More is up, less is down. Or purposes or destinations, their goals, or things you're trying to reach, or difficulties, something that keeps standing in your way. Okay? Not just here, but around the world. These are what are called primary metaphors. Affection is warmth. So people are warm people, cold people, etc. Not physically warm in terms of the thermometer, but affection. Now, how does it occur that these metaphors are there, and that many of them are spread around the world, and that they're learned in childhood? By the time you're 6 or 7, you have learned hundreds of these. How does that work? Well, that was figured out about a dozen years ago by a grad student, now a research student at UC Merced at Berkeley. And here's how it goes. And it's fairly simple if you understand how the brain works. Suppose that you're a kid, little kid, baby, and you're looking around, as babies do, and you see your parents pouring water into glasses or formula into bottles, and every single time the level goes up. And they put things in a pile, and every single time the level goes up. Now, you may not even notice this consciously, but your brain notices it. And your brain has activated two parts. There's been an activation of the part of the brain that registers verticality, and another part that registers quantity. And they occur together, verticality and quantity, going and up. Now, what happens when this is repeated every single day, over and over, every single time? What happens is that those two parts of the brain fire together in different places. Now, it turns out every neuron is connected to about 10,000 others along existing pathways. So, as that fires over and over, then the synapses of the neurons get stronger. So increased firing increases synapses, synaptic strength. It gets stronger. That spreads. That gets stronger. That spreads. That gets stronger. And it keeps spreading until they come together, finding the shortest path, and they form a single circuit. That circuit is the metaphor horizon. It's physical. Metaphors are physical. Frames are physical. Narratives are physical things, features of your brain. And once they're there and they recur over and over and get strong, they don't go away. More is going to be up the rest of your life. Chemically. And if you say prices go through the roof, you understand it immediately. Okay, so that's the basic story of metaphors. Metaphors, as you will see, occur in politics all over the place. Then there's the question of self-interest. Is the purpose of reason just to reason about your self-interest, just to achieve your purposes? And it turns out not to be so. There's another really important variable, which has to do with empathy, caring about other people. And this concerns a wonderful discovery that was made in Parma, Italy in 1996. And here's how that works. At that time in the lab, they had the cat monkeys. Those monkeys were set up, they were set up with probes in their brains to see in the premotor cortex, which choreographs complicated actions, to see what neurons were firing, neuron by neuron, when they performed actions like pressing a bar or peeling a banana. And they could see this, and every time that would happen, the machine would work particularly quick. Going very well. The researcher went out for lunch one day, came back, hadn't had dessert, so a pile of bananas, picked it up, started to peel it, and very quickly it was okay. But the machine was hooked up to the monkey, not him. Okay. Turns out that the same neurons fire if you perform an action or you see someone else perform the same action. And this isn't miraculous. It turns out it's because there are certain neural connections between the premotor cortex here and the parietal cortex back there. Parietal cortex integrates perception. Now, those regions where there are mirror neurons, M-I-R-R-O-R, mirroring, those regions are connected to the emotional regions. And that is why you can see somebody else being very happy and feel their joy. You can see somebody writhing in pain and feel their pain. It is the physical basis of empathy. It is what links us emotionally to each other. It is what holds people together socially. right? A lot of your reasoning is based on empathy, on your interactions, empathetic interactions with other people. It's not just a matter of self-interest. So what have we seen? Basically, the idea of enlightenment reason, that reason is conscious, etc., all of those facts, that it fits the world directly, that it's logical, it's just false. Every one of those things is false. Now, why do you care? And why should you care if you're interested in contemporary politics? It turns out it matters terrifically. One of the reasons has to do with framing and frames. Every word, as Charles Fillmore, a great linguist, discovered, every word is defined relative to a frame. What does define mean? It means that there are neural connections that when you say the word, activate some element of a frame. And frames are ordinary things. They're things like, bottle. It's a frame for a bottle. Right? There's a container that has to put inside of it. You can put things in and put them out. They're a certain size. You can pour them into other things and so on. That things you can move your body. That's all you know about a bottle. Very simple minded frame. In politics, it's much more interesting. There are frames for things like the market. There are frames for things like a war. There are frames for all sorts of things. Taxes, for example. And the question is, what are those frames and how do they work? So, for example, I did a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. Right? Why? Because the word elephant evokes an image of an elephant and a frame of knowledge structure about an elephant. And even if you negate the frame, you activate the frame. Why does this matter for politics? Because if you are arguing against somebody who has a different opposite viewpoint, and you use the same words, you're going to activate that person's frame. So, for example, last week I published an article called "Don't Think of a Maverick." The Obama campaign had put out an ad called "No Maverick," pointing out and saying that McCain was not a maverick, and they used the word "maverick" 8 times. Thus activating the maverick frame in the end, helping McCain every time. Okay? Now, this matters when you start summing it up, because it happens over and over. Take a term like tax relief. Well, what that says, what is the frame for relief? Very simple. You have some affliction and afflicted party, a hero who takes the affliction away, and if you try to stop it, you're a bad guy. Okay? Add tax to that, and taxation is an affliction. That's a conservative idea. So if somebody starts, Democrats are saying, we're going to give tax relief to the middle class, they're helping conservatives. When the New York Times talks about tax relief on its front page, it's evoking conservative ideas. Maybe not even knowing it. Okay. Why? Well, a very interesting thing has happened. It turns out that a lot of people who are Democrats believe in Enlightenment reason. And in Enlightenment reason, the 18th century version, there are no frames. It's all logic. Reason fits the world directly, without frames, without metaphors, without narratives. And they think that frames would necessarily be manipulating people. That only conservatives would do something like that. Now, conservatives don't worry about this because they grew up with marketing. They're business people, came through the marketing. And every marketer knows perfectly well what to think in terms of frames and metaphors and images and emotions. And they've been doing this for years. Now, as a result, conservatives have, over the past 35 to 40 years, set up a huge enterprise to market their ideas. That was started in 1971. Lewis Powell, who was appointed to the Supreme Court by Nixon, wrote up the plan. In 1971, was the height of the Vietnam War, and Powell observed that a very bad thing was happening in conservative business. The best and brightest of our young students did not want to become conservative businessmen. And so he said, he wrote to the National Chamber of Commerce, this is terrible, we got to do something about it. And he outlined the plan. The plan went like this. He said, we got to get rich conservative businessmen to endow chairs in universities to teach our view of economics and business. We have to get, and so you have the Olin chairs throughout the country, for example. Then we have to start institutions and institutes in major universities and fund them well. The Olin Institute at Harvard, the Hoover Institution in Stanford, for example. They said we can't trust universities. We have to build our own research institutions, called think tanks. And we have to give them lots of money, hire our own intellectuals, give them lots of research support, give them lots of help, and so on. And create opportunities for them to publish, create new journals, magazines, book publishing outlets. And we have to buy media to get those ideas out there. And if they're really going to spread, we have to set up leadership institutes to train conservative leaders how to talk and think in terms of the ideas coming out of the think tanks. And they have done this, spending over $4 billion in those years. Current expenditures are about $400 million a year. Now, that doesn't count, actually buying media and stuff like that. But what has happened is that is perfectly legal and overt. There's no hiding it. What has happened is something remarkable. When you hear words like tax relief, you're activating conservative frames. And when you activate them in their brain, when they're activated, even if you don't believe them, they stay there, they get stronger. The circuits are reinforced. When you say John McCain is no maverick, the idea that he's a maverick is reinforced. He gets stronger. And when you say he is, he gets stronger either way. The idea is that you have a huge institution out there that over 40 years has shaped American political discourse. So much so that people in the media, who might be liberals, take the normal language that has been put out by conservatives and invented largely by conservatives and taught over and over again, and they repeat it, thus helping conservatives with their liberals. So this is a rather remarkable thing that has happened. It's sort of under the table in terms of its effects. And you have to know something about cognitive science to understand why it works. Because if you believe in enlightenment reason, if you believe that all reason is conscious, that words are just fitting ideas that can fit the world directly, then you'll miss all of this. You'll miss all framing of all ideas. So that's the first part of why this is important. Now, why is it important to understand a little bit about metaphor? Well, it turns out that a lot of our politics uses metaphor all over the place. Let me give you an example. What was your first experience with governance? Your family, right? Your family, your parents, and so on told you what to do to take over your life. What happened? You have family members you recognize, and you're being governed. Two parts of your brain are activated. You learn a metaphor of governing institutions of family. It could apply to the church, it could apply to kindergarten, it could apply to the nation. So we have a lot of stuff on the governing institutions of families. Have you ever wondered why all these political speeches have the family members trotted out? Oh, here's my family, here's what a good parent I am, blah, 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 right? It's activating the nation as a family. Now, what's particularly interesting is the kind of family it is. It turns out that we have two very different kinds of families that work according to two different systems of moral thought, two different moralities. Now, let me talk about morality for a minute and how that arises. Metaphor is how it works here too. For example, what is morality about? It's about well-being, the well-being of you, yourself, and the well-being of others. Well, how does well-being show up in the brain, in a physical case? Well-being shows up in the fact that we have two major pathways for emotions. One positive, one negative. The positive one has the neurotransmitter dopamine. The negative one, norepinephrine. The negative one goes past parts of the brain which, when activated, make you feel fearful, anxious, angry, disgusted. The ones that go past the positive ones make you feel happy, satisfied, a sense of well-being, a sense of awe. Okay? So we have two different parts of the brain, and of course, the activation of one inhibits the other. Now, it turns out that this notion of satisfaction or dissatisfaction is there physically in your brain. Now, how does that fit with other kinds of experiences? Right? For example, take eating. If you eat pure food, you feel satisfied. If you eat rotten food, you don't feel satisfied, you feel disgusted. Okay? That leads to a metaphor that morality is purity, and immorality is rottenness. That was a rotten thing to do with, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, etc. There's lots and lots of pieces of it all over. That's a disgusting thing to do. It's immoral. Why does it mean immoral? For exactly that reason. So when you understand something about the brain, you can see why around the world you have purification rituals. Now, there are many others. Any one-year-old knows that you're better off if you can stand up and you have to fall on the ground. So it turns out that we have a metaphor. Morality is uprightness. Immorality is being low, a low down state. You have that metaphor for morality. Next, what else? You're better off if you're being cared for and nurtured as a child than if you're not. So morality is nurturing. In general, you're better off as a child if you listen to your parents and you try to protect you and take care of you, than if you don't. So morality is obedience. Those two metaphors, morality is nurturing and morality is obedience, give rise to two models of the family that occur all over America. The nurture and parent model and the strict father model. And they are very, very different. And those two models form the basis of either progressive or metaphorically, not literally. We're not saying that because you were raised this way in your family, you're necessarily one way or the other. In fact, you learn both of them. But let me try to give you a sense of what this is about. Many of you may have heard of James Dobson. He is a Christian conservative leader. He runs the largest child-rearing outfit in America, called Focus on the Family. Now, just to give you a sense of how influential this is, he is on more radio stations than anyone else in America. His column appears in more newspapers than anyone else in America. He has so many people writing for his materials, he needs his own zip code. He hires so many people, he has his own freeway exit. Just to give you some sense of this is, and he was very, very important in the choice of cerebellum. Now, very influential within the Republican Party. What does he teach about child rearing? He teaches what I'll call a strict father model of the family. And it goes like this. It says, why do you need a strict father? He's there to protect the family with good and evil, and he's got to protect the family against evil in the world. Why do you need a strict father? By the way, mommy can't do it. Why do you need a strict father? You need a strict father because he's got to win those competitions and to support his family. Mommy alone can't do this. Mommy's job is to uphold, be strict, but uphold the job of the strict father. You need a strict father because kids are raised bad. What does bad mean? Kids don't know right from wrong. So the strict father's job is to teach them right from wrong. And there's only one way to do it, which is discipline, physical discipline. And in this, Dobson is one of the more liberal versions of this. He says that there's no reason to hit a child ever below the age of 15 months. Now, But, he says, if you're going to punish a child for doing wrong, it has to be painful. Painful enough so that the child will avoid the pain, but avoid the pain by doing right and not wrong. And he claims that's the only way that anybody ever learns to be a moral person. And when they do right, you should reward them with love and care. But it's pain and love together, put out there. Now, he further says that if the child gets this discipline to do right and wrong, internal discipline, then they can go out in the world, into the free market, and through their discipline, become prosperous. Now, there's a logic to this. What happens if somebody is not prosperous? They can't be disciplined enough. They can't be disciplined, they can't be moral, so they deserve their poverty. Right? Sound familiar? Okay. So this is one of the principles of conservative thought that you hear all the time. And there are many others. Part of this says that the strict father is the authority in the family, and there's nobody in the family who has authority over him. That's the person who's in authority. And that other people should follow that authority. We're in line with authority. Very important. That is, he is the decider in the family. Now, apply this to foreign policy. We have America is the decider over other nations. And other nations should, in the family of the nations, should follow what America says. Apply it to the way the government is done, and so on. And you get a straightforward version of the government. But one of the most interesting applications of this is the metaphorical application to the market itself. Have you ever heard the phrase, let the market decide? Right? Notice the word decide takes an animate subject, a human subject. Okay? Not just anybody can make a decision. How can the market decide? Well, it turns out, in the conservative view, the market is A, natural, and B, moral, and should be the ultimate decider of what's right and wrong economically. And the ultimate decider of what happens. What that means is that there should be nothing over the market. Well, what could be over the market? Government regulation, things conservatives want to get rid of. Taxation, which can take some of your profits away, and take away some incentives. Worker rights, unions, that can take away profits. And tort cases, that is, cases where people can sue companies for harming them, which can take away profits. Okay? Those are cases where something else outside is over the market, and they say, you've got to get rid of all this, because the market should decide. Okay? We'll come back to that in terms of today later on. Now, what's important here is to understand that there's another view of the family. And by the way, what happens is you take this notion of the nation as a family, and you apply these things, these metaphors to it, and you get a mode of reading, a conservative mode of reading. That doesn't mean that if you're raised this way, you will necessarily hold this thing this way. We'll get to that in a minute. But this is an ideal. There's another family model called the nurturing family model, and it goes like this. It says, the job of the parent is to nurture a child and raise the children to be nurturers of others. Okay? What is nurturing? Two things. Empathy. You care about that child. You empathize, you know what all those things mean, you understand what a child needs. And responsibility. You have the responsibility to take care of the child, to protect the child, to empower that child with education and so on. And aspiration. You have aspirations for the child. You want the child to live as good a life as possible. So that is what the nurturing parent family is about. Now, you apply this to government and to politics, and what does that say? It says that there is a view of government that comes out of it. And what is that view of government? It says government is there as the following purposes. One, protection and empowerment and aspiration. Because government is there to protect, not just militarily and police protection, but also unions as worker protection, environmental protection, consumer protection, safety nets, health care, all those forms of protection. What about empowerment? Well, you have infrastructure. Government is there to build roads, communication systems, satellite systems, things of that sort. Educational systems, like this building. That's what government is about, to empower people. It's also there to have empower people through having a banking system that's supposed to work. Government is supposed to make sure your banking system works, that your stock market works. That's one of the reasons that government is supposed to be there. That you're supposed to have a court system to uphold contracts. That is, you can't make a dime in this country without government empowerment and government protection. Now, that is a progressive view of government. And it's there throughout all of progressive thought. Anytime you hear a progressive program, progressive idea, you hear that. So now what you have are two sets of ideas, but all of us grew up, or those of us who grew up in America, grew up with both of these models. You know both of them. And so, for example, you might be progressive in everything you actually do in your family life, your politics, or something like that, or your educational ideas. But if you can walk into an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and understand it, you have a Street Father doing the world. Somewhere in here. Very few of you would walk out of that movie saying, gee, what was that about? Now, that's important because it says every one of us who grew up in this country knows in their brains, has structures in their brains where reasoning goes place. This is called right conceptualism. There are two ways. And each of them inhibits the other. This is a fact about brains. We have what's called mutual inhibition. That is circuitry, so that the activation of one circuit can inhibit another one. And either one can inhibit the other. Okay? Now, this is not just in politics, it's all over the place. For example, you probably know people who have one moral system on Saturday night and a different one on Sunday night. Right? Mutual inhibition and unconscious. They live their lives that way, they don't think about it. It's just there. And the same thing is there with people who are biconceptual. That is, people who might have conservative ideas about the economy and progressive ideas about social life, or the reverse. All kinds of combinations. Now, given that, what does all of this have to do with the election? And what does it have to do with what's going on with our economy today? And the answer is everything. Completely different. First, what are presidential campaigns about? Well, Ronald Reagan discovered something important about the nature of presidential campaigns. I learned about this by talking to his chief strategist, Richard Wortham, who I met at a conference and took to lunch. He's in his 80s, very young gentleman, very proud of what he accomplished. And I asked him, what was it like to be Ronald Reagan's chief strategist? He said, well, I was asking to do a poll. And the first poll I did showed that nobody liked Reagan's positions on issues. And everybody wanted to vote for Reagan. And I was the chief strategist, and I had no idea why anyone wanted to vote for my candidate. So he went out, he did more interviews and studies, and here's what he found out. That Reagan talked mainly about values, and issues just illustrated values. He didn't just talk about issues and programs. And the result was people cared about values, not just lists of programs. Reagan communicated with people, he connected with them, and people appreciated that. People believed that Reagan was authentic, that he said exactly what he believed. And authenticity was a value, something that they cared about. As a result, if you know somebody's values, they can communicate with you and they say what they believe, then you can trust them. You might not agree with them, but you know what they're going to do. You can trust in what they're going to do. And you can identify with them. So they ran the campaign not on issues, but on 5 things: values, authenticity, communication, trust, and identity. And when it came to the debates, and the first debate was this Friday, when it came to the debates against Carter and Mondale, on the issues, Carter and Mondale won, but they lost the debates because the debates were not about the issues. They were about values, authenticity, trust, identity, communication. Very important to understand what debates are about and what presidential politics is about. And in George Bush's 2 races, he did the same thing. He ran on those races on those qualities. And Kerry and Gore ran on the issues and lost. And they should have, presumably should have won the Democrats, etc., but they lost. Now, in the nomination race this year, Hillary Clinton ran as a policy wonk, list of issues, lots and lots of issues. Obama ran on those 5 things. He won. Now, more recently, and McCain also has been running on those 5 things. He's also been adopting Reagan's voice. I don't know if you've been listening to it, but he's learning words from Reagan's voice and cadence. But he again is running on these character issues. And as his campaign manager, Rick Davis, said, this campaign is not about the issues. That's what he meant. That's exactly what he meant. And that's why they chose Sarah Palin, because this campaign is about those things. Now, what you see recently is something quite remarkable. And it requires knowing a little bit more about positive history. In 1966 to 68, Lee Atwater and certain of his proteges, like Roger Ailes, who runs Fox News, discovered something very important. They were, at that time, everybody wanted to be a liberal. Liberalism was the in thing to be, especially among working people. Liberals were the heroes of working people. They, however, noticed that a lot of working people had conservative views of patriotism and conservative views of the family when it came to the Vietnam War and feminism. So what they did was they would talk nonstop about just those issues where people were thinking conservative thoughts, reinforcing a conservative mode of thought in their brains. Meanwhile, those same working people had progressive ideas about their unions, about their fellow workers, their communities, about preservation of nature, and so on. They didn't talk about those things. At the same time, they invented an idea, the idea of a liberal elite. Okay? So they started talking about tax and spend liberals and Hollywood liberals and latte liberals and so on. All of those things about the liberal elite. And they kept repeating them. And they've been repeating them for 40 years. Okay? And now what has happened is they created in people's brains, they structured people's brains to be conservative populists. That is, that have conservative ideas localized around the family and patriotism, and ideas that liberals are elitists. Okay? So that's out there. That's one of the things that Obama has to contend with. It's real, it's there. And another reason for choosing Sarah Palin, who fits perfectly in movie like this. Now, that is the situation that we find today. That's out there. And the debates that are coming up are going to have to deal with those situations. It's the fact that a lot of, for the past 40 years, conservative ideas and language have been put out there, ideas about the market and so on. And that among the demographics that may determine this election are working people, many of whom are conservative populists. So what is the challenge for somebody like Obama? He's got to turn around the idea of the liberal elite to get the conservative elite. That's what the 8 houses are about. You know, to say, hey, this would be conservative elite. That's what and they talk about all the lobbyists in the campaign. That's what that's about. They have to turn that around. So very important. They have to get rid of the idea of the liberal elite. That's why Biden and Obama are talking about their poor background and that they're working with working people and so on. So that's part of their job. And the job of McCain and Palin is to keep the idea of the liberal elite and conservative populism. So we get McCain going around with Palin to working class communities. So that's why that is happening. And there are reasons for all of those things. Now, we recently had a meltdown in the economy of a very real nature. And one of the things that's been happening, that happened right after, I want to say one more thing about this, right after Obama won the nomination, he went off for a vacation to Hawaii, took a week off, came back, and was in a sort of pseudo-debate at Saddleback Church with Lawrence Church, and with McCain. And McCain won hands down. First time I'd ever seen Obama really vested in public. And the reason is this. McCain did what you're supposed to do in such a debate, which is answer in short sentences.